It's certainly good to see all of you this morning. There's several visitors with us today. Thank you for coming and being with us this morning and sharing in our worship to God and in our study from God's Word. I'm going to apologize ahead of time. I'm going to get off this green screen very quickly here in a moment. In fact, I'm going to blank it because it's awful. It seems bright and about ready to blind you. I use the cloud. Does that mean anything in anybody? Maybe 10 people in the room, maybe. But I do my sermons and I put them on the cloud. I put them on my OneDrive. And this morning when I come into the building and got the computer that I use for sermons, it's not there. It did not sync for some reason. So I had to quickly put charts together so that you can see the lesson on the screen. So I'm warning you now, I have no idea what it's going to look like when it goes up there. And so be careful, and I'll try not to blind you this morning. I want you to open your Bibles to Psalm 86. I'm going to camp out in 3 Psalms. Not going to be hard work for you today. Just grab your Bible and open it to the Psalms, and we're going to look at 3 Psalms, and we're going to stay in the Psalms the entire time in our study this morning. We're going to look at Psalm 86, we're going to look at Psalm 103, and we're going to look at Psalm 105 together in our study this morning, because it's interesting when you look at these 3 Psalms, and the one that Todd just read for us a moment ago is where we're going to begin here in a moment. But here are 3 different Psalms, and there are 3 audiences in mind that the psalmist has in his mind when he writes these particular Psalms, and each of them has a conversation that's occurring. Anytime you have a conversation, generally speaking, I mean, sometimes I suppose we talk to ourselves, but it's frowned upon a little bit, I guess. But we sometimes may have conversations with people, right? We may have a conversation with others, or sometimes we might talk a conversation with ourselves, or we may have a conversation ultimately with God. And so we want to look at these conversations this morning. And to begin with, here in Psalm 86, we're talking about a conversation that happened between the psalmist and his Creator. We've sang songs this morning that have led us. In fact, the very last song that we just sang, I Need Thee Every Hour, is based out of Psalm 86 and in verse 1. Let's look at this passage again for a moment. Bow down your ear, O Lord, and hear me, for I am poor and needy. I'm needy. And that sometimes is a negative thought. Sometimes when we say somebody's a needy person, what we kind of mean is that they're a selfish person when we say that. That's not what this text is implying. We're not talking here in Psalm 86 and verse 1 about a selfish person who wants everything for themselves and is just trying to hoard everything they can for their own personal benefit. What the psalmist is doing here in verse 1 is he is acknowledging the fact that he is in need of his Creator. That you and I need to spend every day in recognition that I need you every hour. There is not an hour, a moment, a minute that goes by in our lives where I don't need God. The moment that I convince myself in my life that somehow I could have a moment or an hour or a day where God is not necessary, where God can be put aside and ignored for a period of time, is a mistake that I would make. The psalmist recognized that he needed God every hour. I am poor. A better word, we sometimes think of poor in the wrong way sometimes too. We think of the idea of not having wealth. He says, I'm poor, I am empty. Without God, I'm empty. Without God, I am needy. So I'm going to have to pour myself out to Him in order that He might continue to strengthen and help me. But I want you to notice something else about the verse. He said in verse 1, He says, bow down your ear to me. If we need God, then we're going to have the ability to converse with Him and communicate with Him. And God has blessed us with that, and particularly God has blessed us with that ability and through His Son, our great mediator. And this morning's lesson isn't about prayer in that sense, so we're not going to spend time dealing with the idea of Jesus as our mediator between ourselves and God, but just understand that fact that God has blessed us with the ability to communicate to Him, that He hears us. I'm convinced that a lot of times we don't communicate to God because we're determined that He doesn't listen anymore. And the truth is, we've probably found ourselves in moments like that on earth, have we not? There are probably some people in your life that you've just quit trying to even have a conversation with because they never listen to you anyway. We've thrown up our hands and we've said, well, it's wasted words. I don't even know why I'm saying it anymore. I don't even know why I try anymore because they don't listen to a single thing that I ever have to say. and we just quit. And I would imagine that if we're not cautious, we could get into a circumstance in our own lives in relationship to God where we've convinced ourselves that God doesn't listen anymore, that God doesn't pay attention to me anymore, and then I just quit conversing with Him. But I want you to appreciate that the psalmist says, as he appeals to God, he says, bow your ear down to me. God listens. God hears because He said, I need you. I need God's help. We like to be independent people. I get it. I understand that mindset in a lot of different ways. We tend to be kind of people in a lot of times where we just assume what? If you want it done, do it yourself. If you want it done, just do it yourself, because then you know it'll get done the way you want it done, right? That's really what that's about, by the way. We want it done a certain way, and the truth is we don't trust anybody else to do it for me. I need to start trusting God to help me. I need His help. Verse 2, notice, he said, preserve my life, for I am holy. You are my God. Save your servant who trusts in you. Trust Him. Trust in the God of heaven. Trust in the God who will aid and assist and benefit us. We need to trust in Jesus and in our Creator. We need to trust in this God who says He will strengthen us and encourage us and help us along the way. I need to recognize that God is reliable and helpful and beneficial every step of my life. And again, I'm concerned that the reason why we don't communicate and we don't ask and we don't express the needs that we have before God is that we don't trust Him to fulfill the purposes that He's promised us. Many times our challenges of faith, many times our challenges of relationship with God are more to do about whether we trust Him or not than anything else. I don't trust that He can do this. I don't trust that He can fulfill these things. And so we turn away. The psalmist says, I trust you. I have needs, I put them before you. I have things that I need your help with, and I rely upon you to aid and assist me through those things. Jump to verse 5. For you, Lord, are good and ready to forgive, and abundant in mercy to all those who call upon you. I want you to notice with me there in verse 5 that he said, He is merciful to all who will call upon Him. He is merciful for anyone who will seek mercy. You remember what Jesus said? I said I was going to stay in the Psalms, but am I allowed to quote another passage with you this morning? You remember what Jesus said in the Beatitudes? He said, Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. That there is a relationship to our willingness to be merciful and how God will be merciful in return to me. But what I love about what the psalmist said was there in that verse is that He is merciful to all who will appeal to Him. All I can take from that is simply this: I need to ask God for mercy. I need to ask, not just expect it. I think a lot of us just kind of assume God will give it to us, right? That it'll just happen. But it appears to me, according to the psalmist, that mercy is something that I call upon God for. Lord, be merciful to me. You know, there is something therapeutic, for lack of a better word. There is something spiritually therapeutic about me lowering myself, humbling myself before God, and appealing to Him and saying, I need your mercy. Forgive me. I've failed. I've stumbled. I've fallen. I haven't lived up to the righteousness that you demand. I have not lived according to the life that you would have for me. I need your mercy, for I'm weak. God is merciful to all those who will appeal to Him. And then notice verse 7. In the day of my trouble I will call upon you, for you will answer me. You will answer me, he said in verse 7. He's confident in a response. He's confident that there was a response coming from Jehovah. He's confident that there will be an answer that God gives. We don't always like the answers that God gives. And we could talk about the manner in which God answers prayer. Sometimes He says yes, sometimes He says no, sometimes He says wait, sometimes He says yes and then some. There are all kinds of ways that God may answer prayer, but I want you to recognize, let's all recognize collectively this morning, that the psalmist reminds us that you can have confidence that an answer is coming. Not your answer, not my answer. You see, I'm concerned again that in our communications and conversations with God, that oftentimes we quit communicating with Him because we didn't like the answers we got. We didn't like the response God gave. Because we've determined that God should just simply always answer in whatever we would like Him to answer. We sometimes assume that God should just respond and answer us in the manner that I desire. And so set that aside and just recognize together this morning. The psalmist wants us to appreciate that you and I can have great confidence in the fact that God will answer our prayers. God will answer our appeals and our thoughts that are brought before Him. And so every day, may the psalmist and this lesson challenge us to first and foremost have a conversation with God. Every hour, appeal to the mercy of God. Every day, appeal to the God who strengthens me. Every day, when we're troubled and we're challenged, appeal to the God who we can confidently recognize will answer. Appeal to the God whose ear is listening and whose mercy is great. Number two, let me suggest to you that sometimes we need to have a conversation with ourselves. Sometimes I need to have a conversation with myself. And like we said earlier, sometimes that may seem odd. And we almost think, well, why not? Small voice talking to am I having a conversation? But I want you to see something in Psalm 103. In Psalm 103, and we're just going to look at the first 5 verses. Psalm 103, beginning in verse 1. And I want you to notice the tone of the conversation at the very beginning. He says, "Bless the Lord, O my soul." So who's the psalmist talking to? He's talking to himself. Bless the Lord, O my soul. He's commending himself, challenging himself, reminding himself that he needs to be blessing the Lord. And all that is within me, bless His holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, with all that is in me. Let me just put it in some simpler terms maybe for us. Bless Him and mean it. Bless the Lord and mean it. We sang this morning, "Bless the Lord, O my soul." We sang it directly out of this text. Bless the Lord and mean it. When we sing songs of praise, when we sing to God, too often I'm concerned that we sing words without thinking about words. We sing phrases and thoughts without thinking about what those thoughts really mean. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and mean it. Recognize what it is that you're saying. Recognize what it is and the importance of it. All that is within me. When you and I bless the Lord, when we praise His name, it needs to come from within our very being and who we are. It never becomes superficial. In verse 2 he says, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all His benefits." How many of you become forgetful? Wow. Right? We are a forgetful creature. And I'm afraid that's getting worse, by the way. Because I'm afraid we live in a time and in a world where there's a lot more stuff to have to remember. There's a lot more things that you have to remember. I mean, who would have thought that we'd live in a day and age where you got to have passwords to just about do anything? And then they tell you, don't just have one password, right? You got to have multiple passwords in order to stay secure. And we create those things thinking, well, I'll remember, there won't be any problem, right? And 2 days after you create it, you can't even remember that you created it, let alone what it was. We're forgetful people. And so the psalmist says, be careful. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all His benefits. And what do you got to do if you want to remember things? You've got to remind yourself of them, right? And you have to use things over and over and over again. I bet half the people in this room right now don't know your own cell phone number. You know why you don't know it? Because you never call yourself. Right? You don't call yourself, so you never use the number. Sometimes we have a hard time. I could tell you phone numbers of people I grew up with here in town. I could start rattling them off to you right now. Phone numbers. Why? Because for years and years and years I used them daily, using those numbers, right? By use. Bible says, by reason of use, you have your senses what? Exercised unto serving the Lord. That by reason of use, we become stronger and greater and better benefited in our faith and our relationship with God. He says, Psalmist says, I tell myself, bless the Lord, O my soul. Don't forget the Lord's benefits. So how do I do that? Well, number one, I remind myself. I almost had Kevin lead this morning. Count your blessings. Name them one by one. First thought with that, by the way, every time I sing that song, I think to myself, this is going to take a while. Because if I was honest and sat down and really tried to enumerate my blessings, it would be quite a day. If I was honest about the things the Lord has blessed me with. But it is a worthy effort to take some time and remind ourselves of what God has blessed us with. Don't fall prey to this world that we live in, who sensationalizes anything and everything that is harmful, hurtful, negative, and bad. You think about it. We live in a world that amplifies all things negative. And so because of that, and I can't control that, I don't know Rupert Murdoch or any of them other people that run these big news channels, okay? I don't know any of them. So I can't call them up and say, hey, let's dial it down a little. So what I have to do on a personal level is remind myself of the good that God has done for me. And the blessings that God has provided for me in my life. And the benefits that He provides. I need to talk to myself. Not in that crazy kind of way. But in a beneficial way. Brian, don't forget what God has done. Don't forget the benefits that He's brought. Jump to verse 3. Who forgives all your iniquities. Who heals all your diseases. The context seems to be spiritual in nature, by the way. But I want you to notice that He said, don't forget that you're a forgiven being. Don't forget the forgiveness that God extends. Don't forget that the forgiveness comes despite how vile we have become sometimes. Add verse 4. Who redeems your life from destruction, who crowns you with loving kindness and tender mercies. Brian, don't let the world define your God. Because you won't know God if you let the world define Him. Don't let the world, you remind yourself every day, you remind yourself of what the Bible tells you about your God. Remind yourself daily about the tender mercies and the loving kindness and the benefits that God brings. Remind yourself of who the God of the Bible is on an everyday basis. Talk to yourself. Remember, don't be forgetful. Because the world will bombard us with images and thoughts and presentations that try to get us convinced that if God exists at all, He is far different than what this book tells you He is. And young people especially, may I pause for a moment and just preach at you for a minute. I know I get that way sometimes. Deal with it, right? But can I just encourage you for a moment this morning that the world is going to try to tell you all kinds of things that you should think about God and not think about God. And I'm imploring you that while you are being bombarded with thought and imagery and all kinds of things that are trying to mold and shape what you ought to think about God, I'm begging you that as you grow up and you eventually move on from your home and begin your own lives, that you will remember that this is the book that defines God. This is the place that tells us, do not forget that here is your definition of God. Here is the picture that you need to have of God. And the psalmist says He's loving and tender and kind and merciful and forgiving. Know your God. Talk to yourself and remind yourself of all the good things that come from Him. Verse 5, who satisfies your mouth with good things, so that your youth is renewed like the eagles. Older folks, doesn't that sound great? So your youth is renewed like the eagles. You may not be renewed in body. You may not be able to run and jump and fly and do all the things that you once did physically in your youth. But by reminding ourselves on a daily basis of the blessings of God, bless the Lord, O my soul, I can be renewed and feel brand new every day. Like an eagle soaring in my relationship with God. I can be vibrant and alive every day by reminding myself of all that God is and the blessings that He brings to me personally. So talk with God, talk with yourself, and finally this morning, friends, out of Psalm 105, and again I apologize, I knew that was probably going to happen eventually, some problem with the chart. But out of Psalm 105, now I'll go talk to others. Don't be satisfied with recognizing these things on your own personal level, but now also go talk to others about it. Psalm 105, first 5 verses. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, call upon His name, make known His deeds among the people. There's a song that's got those words in it as well. I just remembered it. But make known His deeds among the people. Let others know. How do I do that? Sing to Him. Sing psalms to Him. Talk of all His wondrous works. I know it's not easy to talk favorably about God in a world that wants to not talk favorably about God. But we need to start having better conversations. We need to start speaking words about our God and speaking favorably about Him to others in real meaningful ways so that His name will be glorified. Verse 3, glory in His holy name. Let the hearts of those rejoice who seek the Lord. Seek the Lord and His strength. Seek His face evermore. Remember His marvelous works which He has done, His wonders and the judgments of His mouth. Verses 1 and 2 tells us, let others know about Him. Let others know about this God. If you've got something wonderful in your life, don't you generally share it? You think about that. We live in a day and age where instantaneously you can share any kind of news you want with about as many people as you'd like to share it with. Chaperoned a trip here for a couple of days last week, and one kid was walking around. He had his Twitter tag on his back, trying to see how many people he could get to follow him on Twitter. It worked. There are all kinds. He didn't even know them. There's just all kinds of people. Here's the point. There are infinite ways to communicate now. Infinite ways to be able to communicate. And so advantage those communication things. And so if your daughter wins the Nobel Prize, by all means, put it out there. But don't forget to talk about your God too in favorable ways. Find ways to communicate about who God is and how He benefits us. Let others know that there's a great God who would bring benefit to them if they would come to Him as well. In verse 3, he said, encourage others to see the joy and service to God. If you portray your service to God as a burden, why would anybody be interested? One of the greatest challenges to growth, one of the greatest challenges to church growth is miserable Christians. Because that's the image. Right? That's what the world sees. If the world sees miserable Christians, then what appeal does Christianity have to them? Another song I almost suggested to Kevin this morning, there was a bunch of them, I couldn't get them all in, but was, we are the world's Bible. Sometimes we are the only hands, feet, the mechanism, the tool that God has to use to reach certain people. There are folks who may never pick this book up if they are not first encouraged and led and influenced to do so. Converse with others, the psalmist says. Encourage others to see the joy. Let the world know that you love being a child of God and that it's never a burden, never a burden to be a child of God. Encourage others in the walk. Verse 4, mind you again, seek the Lord in His strength, seek His face evermore. Encourage others to stay strong, to stay steadfast, and commend them in such. And as verse 5 indicated, remember His marvelous works which He has done, His wonders, and the judgments of His mouth. Remind each other. We already talked about fact number 1. Remind myself on a daily basis of what God has done. But also now let's take that one step further and let's converse and remind each other of what the Lord has done. And that His instructions, His judgments. What God has determined to be right and wrong, what God has determined as righteous and unrighteous, what God has determined to be beneficial and things that are not beneficial to me, remind ourselves of how good His judgment is when it comes to those things. Have you ever encountered somebody in your life where you just kind of say to yourself, man, they're really smart. They're just really smart. They seem to understand circumstances pretty good, and they make pretty good judgments about things, and there's an appeal about them because they God's judgments. There's no one should reach a greater appeal than God does when it comes to making a judgment about what's good for me. You want the best counsel and advice that you could ever find to make your life better? Right here it is. Right here it is. The judgments of God are good. But unfortunately, the problem we have is that we don't always like what's good for us, do we? We don't always like what's good for us. I'm sorry, Mark, for what I'm about to do. I spent about 6 hours in the ER with Mark down in Charleston the other day. He's all right. He's sitting there, right? He's okay. While I sat in that waiting room, I was amazed by a lot of things, but anyway, I could tell the stories all day. But I was amazed by how many people came in there feeling horrible. And the nurse would come out, and they didn't have any beds, and they're basically triaging in the hallway. And they said that they'd come and they say, "What medicines you're on?" And they'd say, "Well, the doctor put me on this, this, and this, but I'm not taking it." And then they wondered why they were in the emergency room. Right? Now, you choose. I'm not telling you what to do. You choose. I understand. I get it all. Sometimes I read those side effects and I'm thinking, I'll take my chances. but you can't. You kind of can't have it both ways, can you? You can't say, "Well, they tried to help me, but I refused it. But now I want you to help me." Right? You can't. You kind of can't have it both ways. The Lord's saying, "I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to benefit you. What I'm offering you is good. What I'm offering you is beneficial. What I'm offering you is eternal." And now I just need to communicate with God and show my appreciation for that. I need to talk to myself and remind myself daily of what God is bringing to me. And I need to start telling others that there's a plan in this book called the Bible that will benefit them and us if we'll but turn ourselves over to it. And so this morning, will you turn your life over to the good that the Bible describes? Will you give your life in service to Christ? Will you become part of His kingdom? Will you honor and serve Him? Will you love Him? Will you bless the Lord, O your soul, through your obedience this hour? Can we help you in some way? Pray for you? Encourage you? If there's anything we could do to help and strengthen you spiritually this morning, we'd encourage you to consider your relationship with God even this hour. Won't you come while we stand and while we sing?